Welcome, everyone, to The Wandering Jew, Fundamentals of Kabbalah and Chassidut. We are continuing our series on the book from Rav Ginsburgh, and we are in the section called Commandments. For those who have the book, we're on page 130. Page 130. Now, all of the ones that remain in commandments are longer than many of the ones that we have been doing, but I see no reason to rush through anything. So we might get through just one or two, but that is okay because each one is so full of wisdom. There's no reason to rush. But I have to mute everyone. I'm sorry. Okay. Okay, again, page 130. So this one is called Cleanliness of Speech, Purity of Thought, and Chastity of Deed. So he begins like this, and almost immediately I'm going to have to explain what he is basing this idea on. So he starts, in the 10-rung ladder of spiritual growth outlined by Rabbi Pinchas ben Yair, 3 consecutive rungs are described as cleanliness brings one to purity, purity brings one to chastity. He explains in brackets that chastity means abstinence from overindulgence in physical pleasures. Now, let's understand what he is basing this on. That in the Mishna Sotah, anyone who wants to look this up, in the 9th chapter, at the end of the 15th Mishnah. So again, it's the 9th chapter, the 15th Mishnah. There is a quote from Rabbi Pinchas ben Yair. That's what he said. He's quoting from this statement in the Mishnah. It's a very, very famous statement because I'm just going to hold up one example. In the middle 1700s, there was a great, great rabbi called the Ramchal, Rabbi Moshe Chaim Luzzatto, originally from Italy. His life is very, very fascinating. We're not going to go into that right now, but he ended up moving to Amsterdam. And in Amsterdam, he released a number of books that have become classics. Now here I'm just holding this up. In English, this is called The Path of the Just, Mesillat Yesharim. This is one of his famous books that is studied universally in Israel. It doesn't matter if you're a Chassid, or you're a Naged, or what? Miriam Leah is holding up her copy, and I'm sure some of you also have it. It's a very, very famous book, and it's based on this Mishnah that I'm about to read to you. And that's what Rav Ginsburgh is saying. He's going to, of these 10 rungs, he has chosen 3 of them, but I want to read you the whole thing so you have the context. So Rabbi Pinchas ben Yair said, Zrizut mivi'ah liyadei nikiyut. There are going to be 10 rungs or levels here. So the first one he says is, and there are different ways to translate these words. He says that alacrity or watchfulness brings one to cleanliness. Unekiyut meviyah liyadei tahara. And cleanliness brings you to purity. The tahara meviyah liyadei parishut. And purity leads you to separation, or in Rabbi Ginsburgh's words, chastity. These are the three that he's going to be talking about: cleanliness, purity, and chastity. But it goes on. Uprishut meviyah liyadei kedusha. And separation brings you to holiness. Now, we've discussed many times that the actual meaning of the word holy, lahakdish, is to separate. That's the most simple understanding of holiness, is separation, clarification. Ukedusha meviyah liyadei AhAVah. And holiness brings you to humbleness. But AhAVah meviyah liyadei yirat chet. And humbleness leads you to the fear of sin. The yirat chet meviyah liyadei chassidut. And the fear of sin brings you to chassidut. Many ways to translate that. I want to look at the English version I have here. Saintliness. That's one way. Saintliness. Of course, Chassidut is what we call Chassidism, Chassidut. But here it's translated as, how did I say it? Saintliness. To be a chassid is to be saintly. V'chasidut meviyah liyadei ruach hakodesh. And chassidut, saintliness, or Dara says piety, leads you to divine inspiration, ruach hakodesh. V'ruach hakodesh meviyah liyadei techiyat hametim. And divine inspiration brings you to this level called the resurrection of the dead. V'techiyat hametim ba'a al yedei Eliyahu zachor letov, amen. And the resurrection of the dead is brought by none other than Elijah the prophet. He should be remembered for the good, amen. So this is, again, a Mishna in Sotah. And it has 10 rungs. Now, obviously, on a deep level, the 10 rungs are going to be connected to the 10 Sefirot and all the many other things that are related to the number 10. Now we're going to go back to the Wandering Jew. Okay? So now, Rav Ginsburgh says like this. Now that we have a context of what we're learning. These three attributes, cleanliness, purity, and chastity, correspond to the three garments of the soul: thought, speech, and action. These are considered the three garments of the soul. In other words, how does the soul express itself in this world? What is its avenue to be able to express itself? Rav Ginsburgh says thought, speech, and action are the three garments of the soul. But here he's going to explain that cleanliness, purity, and chastity, it will not be in that order, as he will explain. But he says that these three, cleanliness, purity, and chastity, also connect to the three pilgrimage festivals of Pesach, Shavuot, and Sukkot. So now he's going to explain each one. Excuse me. Cleanliness is primarily an attribute of speech. Maimonides explains that Hebrew is called the holy tongue because because it is an essentially clean language. It has no dirty words. Maimonides points this out. Like what we call slang, or call them dirty words, that the holy language doesn't go there. In other words, it's a clean language. The holiday of speech is Pesach. Speaking freely does not mean to speak however you like, to use whatever words you like, whether clean or dirty. Speaking freely means being able to verbally express your heart's innermost emotions, an exodus of the heart. Such deep and authentic self-expression comes out clean. So here, his first step is he's connecting cleanliness to speech. Before we said the three garments of the soul are thought, speech, and action. But he said that when they're connected to the holidays, they won't be in that order. So here he begins with speech and connects, first of all, speech to Pesach and speech to cleanliness. So let me explain a little bit more. The Arizal said, if you read the word Pesach and you divide between the syllables, Pesach, Pesach, literally means the mouth speaks, the mouth converses. We know that the text that we read on Pesach night at the Seder is the Haggadah. Haggadah means to tell the story. And in fact, on Pesach night, there are only two mitzvot that are considered in our day from the Torah. The rest are from the rabbis. And those two are to eat matzah and to tell the story of coming out of Egypt to our children or to each other. So here I'm just mentioning why speech is connected to Pesach. And there's one other thing, is that the letter of the month of Nisan is the letter He. And He is always connected to expression and to speech, because there's five what are called five openings of the mouth, 5 places in the mouth where letters are formed, with the lips and the palate and the tongue and the throat. So Pesach, Nisan has much to do with speech. And here he's saying speech is clean. To really express ourselves, it will come out clean if we're expressing ourselves from the depths of our heart. Now he goes on. The holiday of Shavuot, which commemorates the giving of the Torah, corresponds to the attribute of purity. More precisely, purity of thought. For 7 weeks, the bride, the collective soul of Israel, purifies herself to marry her groom, God, on Shavuot. All her thoughts concentrate solely on her groom. So this is connected, obviously, to Sfirat HaOmer. Now, it's true that we, with speech, we count the days. Hayom Yom Echad LaOmer. Today is the first day of the Omer. Today is the second day, the third day. But really, to get any meaning out of it, it's all in thought. It's what we can do with understanding the cycle of the 7 weeks, and especially how the Sfirot interplay. The first day is Chesed Sheba Chesed. The second day is Gevura Sheba Chesed. Third day is Tiferet Sheba Chesed. And it's only through thought that we actually know what to do with these 7 weeks. It's all in the kavanah of what we're thinking about and what kind of tikkunim, rectifications that we can make during these 7 weeks. So that's why he's connecting Shavuot to thought. Now, Rav Ginsburgh says the holiday of Sukkot corresponds to the attribute of chastity. Remember, he said chastity is abstinence from overindulgence in physical pleasures. So why is Sukkot connected to chastity? So he says for 7 days, we leave our house and its physical comforts to dwell outside in a booth. We identify with our ancestors who traveled for 40 years on their way to the promised land, living in the wilderness without a home or other physical facilities. Okay, so here he has corresponded Pesach to cleanliness, Shavuot to purity, and Sukkot to chastity. And these, of course, are connected to, in the order of the holiday, speech, thought, and really action. And so now he says something interesting. He says the initials of these 3 words in Hebrew, cleanliness is nikiyut, naki, purity is tahara, and chastity is parishut, which also means separating ourselves from an overindulgence in physical pleasure. So he says if you take those, the acronym, the first letters in the kiyut is a nun, of Tara is a tet, and of Prishut is a pei. You get the word Nataf, which in Hebrew is balsam. And Rav Ginsburgh says balsam is the first of the ingredients that went into the incense offered in the temple service. A soul that possesses these 3 attributes of cleanliness, purity, and chastity is a fragrant soul, a soul capable of sweetening life's severities, bringing healing to the plights of mankind. So here he just does a beautiful, call it play on words, on these 3 of the 10 rungs that we discussed at the beginning, and saying when you're a clean person, physically and in speech and in thought, and you surround yourself with purity and with separating yourself from an overindulgence in physical pleasures, your soul ends up being a sweet smelling soul that has the power of sweetening reality. First of all, we have to know, as I said before, the path of the just, Mesillat Yesharim, hundreds of books have been written about it. That what Rav Ginsburgh is doing here, he's connecting 3 of them. But there have been so many attempts to really understand the ladder of spiritual elevation that the Ramchal was teaching. And what's interesting, I mentioned before that the Ramchal lived a very, very interesting life. In his early years, he was a tremendous mystic, and he was writing Kabbalistic books and teaching, and he was on such a high, unique level that a lot of the establishment rabbis were like scared of what he was revealing. And it's a whole long story, but all of his original books were taken away from him. And he moved to Amsterdam. In Amsterdam, he was accepted. And this is where he released these books. But when you read The Path of the Just, it doesn't sound like a Kabbalistic book per se, but it hides tremendous Kabbalistic wisdom. Later, he did go back to writing more Kabbalistic works. In the last year of his life, he moved to Israel. He moved to Akko. And there's still a Beit Knesset in Akko. I've been there. That was his Beit Knesset. It's still there in the old city of Akko. Unfortunately, he died within a year or two of making it to Israel at a very young age. I believe he was under 40. Okay, so let's continue. Then Rav Ginsburgh, with his mathematical prowess, says these three words, nikiyut, tahara, and prishut, and again in English, cleanliness, purity, and chastity, they equal together 1,781. What is the significance of 1,781? So Rav Ginsburgh says it's the product of the word in Hebrew for love, AhAVah, times Kabbalah. In other words, AhAVah times Kabbalah equals 1,781. And then he makes another amazing connection, that this number 1781 is the Gematria of the three primary Sefirot of the middle axis of the tree of life. What are they? Keter, Tiferet, and Yesod. If you add up Keter, Tiferet, and Yesod, it equals this number 1,781. Keter, Rav Ginsburgh says, is the source of cleanliness, meaning God forgiving us and thereby cleansing us of all of our iniquities. Now, this sounds very much like Yom Kippur. Yom Kippur is the 10th of the month of Tishrei. And of course, the highest of the 10 Sefirot is Keter. Tiferet is called a pure heart. Tiferet is always connected to the heart. And we speak a lot about what's called a pure heart. And Yesod embodies the property of chastity, because Yesod is always connected to sexual energy. And sexual energy needs to be bound to the right context. It's considered one of the highest spiritual acts, but it is surrounded with a lot of boundaries of how and when and where, with whom, all these different things that make it holy. So that's the end of this first one. It was not as simple as many of the other Torahs that we've studied, but there's some very, very beautiful ideas here. I suggest everyone, you probably could even find it online, look at the source of where Rav Ginsburgh is bringing this idea. Okay, we're going to go on to the next one. This is also a fairly long piece, and has really some amazing ideas, and much of it will sound familiar to many things that we've learned already. So this is called From Nothing to Everything. He actually doesn't even mention it here, but this idea, from nothing to everything, in Hebrew is Yesh M'Ayin, something from nothing. It's very connected to from nothing to everything. And that is how we're told, ex nihilo, that the world is created from nothingness and it becomes something or everything. Okay, Rav Ginsburgh starts. Our origin is in the divine nothing, the Ein Sof. Our goal is to understand everything. As it says, those that seek God shall understand everything. Let me look quickly, though, where it's from Proverbs 28:5. Proverbs 28:5 says, those who seek God shall understand everything. We come from Chokhmah, wisdom, the father principle, and we strive to reach Binah, understanding, the mother principle. Wisdom's very essence is nothingness. As the verse says, wisdom appears from nothingness, making nothingness the sort of every new insight, of every new flash of revealed wisdom. So here is something that we've explained many times, is, and it's a little bit tricky, because if you say nothing in English, it means nothing. There's nothing there, a lack of something. But in Kabbalah, the nothing, the ayin, is the source of everything. So it's very paradoxical. The nothing is the source of everything. But it's coming from a place so much higher than intellect or consciousness. So I'll just say it again. Wisdom appears from nothingness. There's a verse that says that. Making nothingness the source of every new insight, of every new flash of revealed wisdom. Wisdom, Chokhmah, is always explained as a flash of insight, like a flash of lightning across one's consciousness. And it seemingly comes from nothing. It's like just a new idea that seemingly just flashes across the mind. Understanding is everything, or all. Since the value of everything or all, in other words, in Hebrew, the word for everything or all is kol, or with the infinitive hakol, everything. Kol. Kol equals 50, referring to the 50 gates of understanding, especially the 50th gate, the understanding of God and his ways. So again, I'm going to back up a little bit. First, he says, wisdom is the source of, wisdom comes from nothing, but it is the source of everything. But that everything, that kol, which equals 50, is revealed in Binah. And that's why we always say that Chokhmah and Binah are like two beloveds who never separate. In other words, Chokhmah without Binah would just be a flash across the mind, and we couldn't do anything with it. It would be there, but it would never be developed. Understanding needs the seed of Chokhmah in order to be able to develop the idea. Or it's like a fetus. The egg cannot create a fetus without the seed, without the zera. So Chokhmah and Binah go together, and somewhat paradoxically, Chokhmah is nothingness, and Binah is everythingness. In the book of formation, meaning Sefer Yetzirah, wisdom is described as the depth of the beginning, where we come from, and understanding as the depth of the end, where we are going, the secret of the world to come. So now he's adding a new thought here, that in Sefer Yetzirah, there are considered 10 depths. 6 of them are the three directions, which go in horizontal, vertical, and depth in 2 directions. So you have 6 depths. And then 2 of them is what he just described, the depth of the beginning and the depth of the end. The depth of the beginning is considered wisdom, and the depth of the end is considered Binah, understanding, which is called the secret of the world to come. And then the last 2 are the depths of goodness and the depths of evil. So here you have, in Sefer Yetzirah, there are 3 types of dimensions. There's Olam, Shanah, and Nefesh. Olam is space. So there are 6 vortexes of space. Time is Shanah, and there you have past and future. And Nefesh is consciousness or soul. And that's where you have good and evil. So in Olam, Shanah, and Nefesh, world, soul, and, world, time, space, time, and consciousness, you actually have 10 different depths. That's what he's explaining here. And of course, these 10 depths connect to the 10 sfirot. Now, Rav Ginsburgh continues. The festival of Shavuot, commemorating the giving of the Torah on the 50th day of the counting of the Omer, which begins with the 2nd day of Passover. The first day of Passover, the day of the Exodus from Egypt, the birth of a new nation, Israel, from a psychological state of servitude, represents our coming from nothing. In other words, while we're in the state of slavery, we don't have, in a certain way, an independent sense of being, of consciousness. It's like coming from nothingness. The culmination, receiving the Torah at Sinai on the 50th day, represents our reaching our goal of everything. That's what we're told on Shavuot at Mount Sinai. The 7 heavens opened up. All of the dimensions that we were talking about, Olam, Shanah, and Nefesh, space, time, and soul, all merged together. Synesthesia, sight and sound, everything merged together. It was like everything. And that's why Rashi says that when God began to speak the 10 commandments, he said all 10 of them in one, it's not even a word, in one utterance. He said all 10 commandments. And this is a Rashi, and Rashi obviously from the sages. And then, and Rashi points out, obviously that's impossible for anyone to hear or understand. And then God went back word by word. So the question is, so then why do it all at once? Because this is the state of everything that the people needed to experience. It was like, again, Rav Ginsburgh is saying on a very deep level, coming out of Egypt, we were like a fetus within the womb. We didn't have an independent reality as individuals or even as a people. And Pesach is considered like the birth of the nation. That's exactly what Rav Ginsburgh says, the birth of a new nation. So we're coming from nothingness. Once the baby is born, then there's a something there. Until the baby comes into this world, it's there, but in a certain way, it's not a real reality yet. And so receiving the Torah on the 50th day, so that's like Binah, understanding, and coming out of Chokhmah, nothingness. These, of course, are very, very deep ideas. You need a lot of contemplation. But here, this is, Rav Ginsburgh is making it fairly simple for us to understand. It's almost like modern science describes the cosmological description of how creation happened from the Big Bang. In other words, before, when you ask, there was this infinitesimal, small, they don't even know what to call it a speck of matter that explodes, and the universe. I just heard a couple of weeks ago, I heard that the newest estimate is that there are 1 trillion galaxies. And then just a few days ago, there was another opinion that there's 2 trillion galaxies. And all of this came from, we don't even know what to call it. And then what science can't or doesn't want to deal with, well, what came before that, whatever we call it. So that's as close as we can get to Yesh M'Ayin, something from nothing. So Rav Ginsburgh is trying to teach us that when we talk about Chokhmah and Binah, not just as like a mystical cosmology, but within our own consciousness, in our thought process, this having an epiphany where this thought just comes seemingly out of nowhere. And yet that we call it an epiphany because it becomes an everything. It can change our lives. We don't use the word epiphany lightly. There's one thing of having a new idea. You think something out, you come up with a new plan. An epiphany is what Kabbalah has been explaining for years, is like a flash of lightning across the mind, a flash of insight, a flash of something in the background of nothingness. And every day in the morning we say, Kulam b'Chokhmah sita. You made everything. Ma gadlu ma'asecha Hashem. How great are your deeds, Hashem. Kulam b'Chokhmah sita. All of them you made with wisdom. And in the Zohar, in one place, it says, when we say Kulam b'Chokhmah sita, you made everything in wisdom, there's afterwards like a couple words in a bracket. You made everything in wisdom to be in Binah. In other words, wisdom without understanding, Chokhmah without Binah, you don't have nothing and you don't have everything. Okay. Now Rav Ginsburgh says, indeed, in the giving of the Torah and Shavuot, there is both coming from nothing, wisdom, and going to everything, understanding. That is what we've tried to explain. God gives us the Torah from his wisdom, from divine nothingness, while we receive and internalize God's Torah with our faculty of understanding. So here, Rav Ginsburgh is just sharpening it, is the Torah is an expression of God's wisdom. But there has to be a receiver. So God gave us the Torah. That is God's wisdom being expressed in the world. But we need to receive it and internalize it. That is the faculty of understanding. This is an ongoing process that begins on Shavuot and proceeds to the ultimate understanding of everything. Indeed, the sole sense of the month of Sivan, on which the Torah was given, is the sense of progress moving forward. So in other words, the chush, the sense of the month of Sivan, is hiluch, which is the root of halakha, of Jewish law. But it means to progress, to walk, to proceed, to develop, to grow. Continue with Rav Ginsburgh. Our path from nothing to everything repeats several times throughout the year. After Shavuot come the 3 weeks, a time of negative manifestation. But in the future, it will be transformed to a time of ultimate goodness. It is a period of mourning over the temple's destruction. The 3 weeks begin on the 17th of Tammuz, the day Moshe broke the tablets of the covenant before the eyes of the people, after the sin of the golden calf. They end on the 9th of Av, the day the people cried over the report that the inhabitants of the land of Canaan were too strong to be conquered. These two events symbolize the unrectified sense of sight, which is the sense of the month of Tammuz, and hearing, the sense of Av, which correspond to wisdom and understanding respectfully. Okay, let me explain. What he's about to do, he's going to go through the entire year with a model. And the model is going from nothing to something, or from going from Chokhmah to Binah, from wisdom to understanding. And what he's saying is, throughout the year, we go through this cycle over and over and over again, from nothing to something, from wisdom to understanding. This is a very, very unique idea that Rav Ginsburgh is giving over here. So, in other words, again, we're going to go back. On Shavuot, he explains that this is we'll call it the first transference from wisdom to understanding, from actually, we're going back to Pesach. Coming out of Egypt is like coming from nothing to 50 days later, receiving the Torah on Sinai. 50 are the 50 gates of understanding. And going from wisdom to understanding, from nothing to everything. Okay, that's the first cycle. Then he says, afterwards there's another cycle, and that is the 3 weeks. And the 3 weeks, especially because it's a time of hachna'ah, of subjugation, that and only at the end is he connected to wisdom and understanding, is because the sense of the month of Tammuz, wherein the luchot were broken, is the sense of sight. Sight is always connected to wisdom, to Chokhmah. And the sense of Av is hearing, which is always connected to Binah. For example, probably the most important one is Shema Yisrael. Hear, O Israel. But everyone understands what it means, understand Israel. In other words, the hearing we're talking about is understanding. Sight is talking about wisdom. Okay, so that was the first cycle of going from wisdom to understanding. Then comes the 10 days of repentance. They begin with Rosh Hashanah, corresponding to wisdom in the soul, and culminating with Yom Kippur, corresponding to understanding. So the reason for this is Rosh Hashanah is the aspect of Kedusha, of holiness, which is always associated with wisdom, Chokhmah. And Yom Kippur is always associated with purity, Tahara, which is always connected to Binah and understanding. So he's saying that on Rosh Hashanah, when we're beginning the year, it's as if we're starting from nothing. It's a new year. It's a new chapter. The page is empty. There's nothing there. The Arizal teaches that when the new year starts, the energy that comes into the world is an energy that has never been there before. It's not just time just continues. You end a year and you start a year. Like a river flow. The Ari says a new year means a whole new energy is coming into the world that has never been there before. And it's coming from nothing. Yesh M'Ayin, something from nothing. Yom Kippur is purity. That's why in Yom Kippur, water is a big part of Yom Kippur. And it's in Musaf. The Kohen Gadol, the high priest, went to the mikvah 5 times in Yom Kippur. When the Kohen Gadol did the service in the temple, between each part of the service, he went to the mikvah. So water is a big part, and there's a verse that we repeat over and over on Yom Kippur. God says, I will pour upon you cleansing waters. because that's the image of Yom Kippur is purity and understanding. Then Rav Ginsburgh says that we get to the festivals of Hanukkah and Purim. Hanukkah is the festival of oil, representing wisdom. Oil is always connected to Chokhmah, to wisdom. And Purim is the festival of wine, representing understanding. Nichnas Yayin, Yesod. Wine goes in and the secret comes out. So this is the idea of understanding, new understanding. Whereas Hanukkah is all about oil. And oil it always represents the idea of wisdom. So then Rav Ginsburgh says, and here we'll end. He ends with a very fancy Gematria. But he just says that these 4 periods of transition from wisdom to understanding, let's go back. Pesach to Shavuot is the first transition. The 3 weeks from the beginning in Tammuz to AhAVah is going from wisdom to understanding. In that case, sight to hearing. Hanukkah is going from oil to wine, wisdom to understanding. And I skipped Rosh Hashanah to Yom Kippur is going from like nothing to something, to everything. So this was, I have to say, both of these Torahs were very, very innovative on the part of Rav Ginsburgh. He gave us a lot to think about, especially his connection to the different holidays. And especially since Rosh Hashanah is coming. And in a certain way, Rosh Hashanah is the new year. And on Rosh Hashanah, even though it's the 6th day of creation, we say, on Rosh Hashanah, say, today is the birthday of the world. Meaning that it's a new year. And as the Arizal said, there really is a whole new energy coming into the world. But the real question is a more of a personal one, is that each and every one of us has to prepare themselves to go from nothing to everything. In other words, in order to be ready and be a proper vessel for new energy to come in, we have to, in a certain way, empty, fix, refine, correct, improve our vessel in order to be able to receive. And in Kabbalistic terms, it means that the more that we can connect to our inner sense of nothingness, and here we mean nothingness, especially with the ego. If we can work on humbleness, being open, opening our vessel, emptying out all of the baggage, all of the frustrations, the failures, the obstacles, and be ready for a new year, that's like going from nothing to everything. We open ourselves up to everything. The page is empty, but we have to work on it during Elul. It's a deep process of contemplation, of what's called cheshbon and nefesh, making a deep accounting. But ultimately, we're just trying to empty our vessel so we can be a recipient of new energy, the everything. So I bless all of us in however we go about it to make ourselves that kind of a vessel so we're really ready for a new year.